know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gale Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This talk presents identifications of Billy the Kid's body, adding to those of his coroner's jury report. The information is from my book, The Coroner's Jury Report of Billy the Kid, the inquest that sealed the fame of Billy Bonney and Pat Garrett. One could say that Billy Bonney's July 14, 1881 killing by Pat Garrett was the best documented death in the Old West. Billy's July 15th coroner's jury report is presented in Talk 36, linked below. As will be discussed in later talks on Billy the Kid imposter hoaxes, Billy's old-timer impersonators and their fraudster promoters hid the huge number of corpse identifications, adding to that of the report's witness, Peter Maxwell, and its 6 jurymen. Additionally, killing Billy the Kid was major national news. For the coroner's jury report, witness Peter Maxwell had stated, I, being in my bed in my room at about midnight on the 14th day of July, Pat F. Garrett came into my room and sat down. William Bonney came in and got close to my bed with a gun in his hand and asked me, who is it? And then Pat F. Garrett fired 2 shots at the said William Bonney, and the said William Bonney fell near my fireplace, and I went out of the room. And when I came in again about 3 or 4 minutes after the shots, the said William Bonney was dead. Pat Garrett, the obvious witness's killer, wrote on July 15, 1881, to acting Governor William Rich, as excerpted here. A man entered the room in stocking feet, with a pistol in one hand and a knife in the other. He came and placed his hand on the bed just beside me, and in a low whisper, who is it? He asked Mr. Maxwell. I knew he was the kid, and reached behind me for my pistol. He drew back from the bed at noticing my movement, and asked me in Spanish, ¿Quién es? ¿Quién es? This gave me time to bring mine to bear on him, and the moment I did so, I pulled the trigger, and he received his death wound. Pat Garrett also gave his account of the killing in his 1882 book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, ghostwritten with his journalist boarder, Ashman Ash Upson. Both men knew Billy. Upson had been a boarder with his family in Silver City. Garrett had met Billy in early 1878 and certainly knew the specifics of his own tracking, capturing, jailing, and killing of him. Garrett's lethality was indisputable. He first killed 2 of Billy's companions in his attempt to kill him. On December 19, 1880, he and his Texan posse ambushed Billy's group returning to Fort Sumner. Tom O'Folliard was fatally shot. At the December 22, 1881 Stinking Springs capture, Garrett fatally shot Charlie Bowdry by mistaking him for Billy. As to his killing of Billy, Garrett's book described his coming to Fort Sumner with his deputies John William Poe and Thomas Kip McKinney, and late that moonlit night of July 14, 1881, stationing them on the porch of the Maxwell family's mansion while he went inside Peter Maxwell's dark bedroom to ask about Billy's whereabouts. The excerpted book stated, At that moment, a man sprang quickly in the door and, looking back, called twice in Spanish, "Quién es, who comes there?" No one replied, and he came into the room. I could see he was bareheaded, and from his tread he was either barefooted or in his stocking feet. He held a revolver in his right hand and a butcher knife in his left. He came directly towards me while I was sitting at the head of Maxwell's bed. He leaned both hands on the bed and asked in a low tone, "Who are they, Pete?" At the same instant, Maxwell whispered to me, "That's him." Simultaneously, the kid must have seen or felt the presence of a third person at the head of the bed. He raised quickly his pistol, a self-cocker, within a foot of my breast. Retreating rapidly across the room, he cried, "Quién es? Quién es? Who's that? Who's that?" As quick as possible, I drew my revolver and fired, threw my body to one side and fired again. The second shot was useless. The kid fell dead at the first one. Pat Garrett's deputy, John William Poe, also wrote a book. A past buffalo hunter like Garrett, he'd been a deputy U.S. Marshal and a deputy sheriff in Texas. In late 1880, he was hired by the Canadian River Cattlemen's Association to combat rustling centered in New Mexico and had moved there to White Oaks. After Billy's killing, Poe was elected Lincoln County Sheriff the next year, serving until 1885, then did ranching, and later moved to Roswell, operating a store and founding the Bank of Roswell and the Citizens Bank of Roswell. Poe's book, The Death of Billy the Kid, was first printed as an article, then as a booklet by an E.A. Brinnenstuhl in 1922. In 1933, it was published as a book. Poe did not know Billy, but the multiple victim identifications left him certain that Billy was the victim. His excerpted book stated, "As Maxwell's was the one place in Fort Sumner that I had considered above suspicion of harboring the kid, I was entirely off my guard, the thought coming into my mind that the man approaching was either Maxwell or some guest of his. Upon seeing me, he covered me with his six-shooter, sprang onto the porch calling out in Spanish, 'Quién es? Who is it?' As I moved toward him, trying to reassure him, he backed up into the doorway of Maxwell's room. An instant after the man left the door, I heard a voice inquire in a sharp tone, 'Pete, who are those fellows on the outside?' An instant later, a shot was fired in the room, followed immediately by what everyone within hearing distance thought were two other shots, but it was a rebound of the second shot. An instant later, Garrett came out. He said to me, 'That was the kid that came in there onto me, and I think I've got him.' I said, 'Pat, the kid would not come to this place. You have shot the wrong man.' Upon my saying this, Garrett seemed to be in doubt himself, but quickly spoke up and said, 'I am sure that was him, for I know his voice too well to be mistaken.' We afterwards discovered that the kid had frequently been at Maxwell's house after his escape from Lincoln. Maxwell then got a candle and placed it on the windowsill from the outside. We saw a man lying stretched upon his back dead in the middle of the room, with a six-shooter lying at his right hand and a butcher knife at his left. Upon examining the body, we found it to be that of Billy the Kid. Garrett's first shot had penetrated his breast, just above the heart. After his jailbreak on April 28, 1881, Billy picked Fort Sumner for two reasons. His secret young lover, Paulita Maxwell, was there, and he trusted protection by the Maxwell family and Fort Sumner's 200 residents who knew him since early 1878. These townspeople's response to Billy's killing was described by Poe in his 1933 book, The Death of Billy the Kid. He wrote, "Within a short time after the shooting, quite a number of the native people gathered around, some of them bewailing the death of their friend, while several women pleaded for permission to take charge of the body, which we allowed them to do. They carried it across the yard to a carpenter's shop, where it was laid out on a workbench, the women placing lighted candles around it according to their ideas of properly conducting a wake for the dead. We spent the remainder of the night on the Maxwell premises, keeping constantly on our guard as we were expecting to be attacked by friends of the dead man. So, further identification of Billy was by women taking his body and by the townspeople at his wake, and they were so certain of his identity that they presented a risk to his killers. Another witness was Delavina Maxwell, an unemancipated Navajo slave bought as a child by Lucien Bonaparte Maxwell, owner first of the 2-million-acre Maxwell land grant, then of Fort Sumner. Attached to Billy for decades, she laid wildflowers on his Fort Sumner grave. Her eyewitness confirmation of Billy's body and her confirmation that the majority of the townspeople had also identified it was given in Fort Sumner in a July 24, 1927 interview to historian J. Evetts Haley. She stated, "I came here about 1869 and was here when Billy the Kid was killed. Billy the Kid was my compadre, my friend, poor Billy. The night he was killed, Billy came in hungry, went down with a butcher knife to get some meat at Pete Maxwell's. After passing the men outside, he went into Maxwell's room where Garrett was, and he shot him. Pete took a candle and held it around the window. When they saw he was dead, they both went in. Most of the native people, Mexicans, who lived in town, went to his funeral. I did not see Billy the night after he was killed, but I saw him the following morning." Billy's Fort Sumner friend, A.P. Paco Anaya, had his memoir published posthumously in 1991 as I Buried Billy. He was in the night vigil for Billy's body. He wrote, "I and my brother and several others of those that were there dressed Billy. Then we laid him on the high bed," note that it was a carpenter's bench, "and on the next day we buried him." There was also front-page national press about Billy the Kid's killing, with no reason to fabricate it, with Billy portrayed as an outlaw murderer whose death was a public relief. Discussed in Talk 36 linked below was the July 23, 1881 Las Cruces, Rio Grande Republicans' Kid the Killer Killed. William Bonney, alias Antrim, alias Billy the Kid, fatally meets Pat Garrett, the Lincoln County Sheriff, which used Pat Garrett's letter to the acting governor on the killing and the coroner's jury report. Here are other territorial examples. On July 18th, the Las Vegas Daily Optic's headline was "The Kid Killed. He meets his death at the hands of Sheriff Pat Garrett of Lincoln County." It stated an inquest was held on his body and the verdict of the jury was justifiable homicide and that Pat Garrett ought to receive the thanks of the whole community and that he is truly worthy of a handsome reward. The July 22nd Las Vegas Daily Gazette, in words of commendation and encouragement, stated, "Immediately on the receipt of the news of the killing of Billy the Kid by Sheriff Garrett, prominent citizens of Roswell and the Lower Pecos wrote us, giving particulars and expressing satisfaction." Here are some national examples. The July 20th Chicago Daily Tribune had account of the manner in which Billy the Kid was killed. It stated, Garrett, who had taken advantage of the dim, uncertain light to get his weapon ready for use, brought it to bear on the kid, shooting him through the heart at the first pull of the trigger. July 23rd, the Weekly Gazette of Colorado Springs had Billy the Kid, "At last the bullet finds its billet. New Mexico's noted outlaw shot by a sheriff." It stated, "The Gazette has positive information from Fort Sumner of the death of Billy the Kid. This noted desperado was killed at Fort Sumner on the 14th by Pat Garrett, Sheriff of Lincoln County." On July 26th, was the Savannah Morning News' Billy the Kid, a youth with 19 murders to his account, the inhabitants of New Mexico overawed by a boy of 21 who was killed at sight. It stated, Pat Garrett started on Billy's trail a few weeks ago, meeting with success, as the Telegraph informs us of Billy's death by his hands. August 10th, the New York Sun article was reprinted in August 12th, the Lancaster Intelligencer, as Billy the Kid. His name was Billy McCarthy, and he was born in New York, murdering a man at the age of 16 under sentence of death, killing 2 men in 30 seconds. The Kid killed. It stated shortly before midnight, Garrett went to Maxwell's and had just seated himself in the dark on the side of Maxwell's bed when the door opened and in walked the Kid. He leveled his pistols, exclaiming, "Quién es?" But this delay of asking was fatal. Before the words were off his lips, Pat Garrett's bullet was through his heart, and Billy the Kid, the terror of New Mexico, lay a gasping, quivering corpse. A later talk will give further confirmation of the corpse's identity as Billy Bonney by the territorial legislatures granting to Pat Garrett the reward for killing of Billy the Kid.